My name is Liviu Boar, and I've been working on an adventure game that, upon release, will make me and my studio absolutely filthy rich. Thank you. They said open with a joke, so yeah, I thought I'd open with a joke. But I really am working on an adventure game. It's called Gibbous, a Cthulhu adventure, and it's this comedy cosmic horror point and click adventure. We've been working on it full time for 2 years, and it's slated to release sometime in 2019. And it's about this cat that gets transformed by the Necronomicon into a walking, talking abomination. And the entire game is sort of an abomination. Again, it's a comedy cosmic horror game. It's hand painted and traditionally animated and fully voiced. And we've been successfully kickstarted back in 2016, and we're super excited to finally bring it to fruition soon. But enough about my game, which incidentally you can follow in wishlist if you go to this very handy URL. We are here to talk about choosing your genre, right? And the thing about choosing your genre is that it's actually pretty easy if you think about it. So that was my presentation. No, just kidding. It is actually very easy, and that's for a very good reason. And that's because what I what I noticed working on other creative projects. This is my first video game, right? But working on other creative projects, I noticed that there's a constant throughout them, and that constant is that your heart and your brain are in this constant battle when you're making something creative, right? It's a constant battle, and what you want ideally is for this battle to be a balanced one, right? You don't want one overpowering the other or dominating the other one too much, because then you'd have, like a pretty unbalanced experience. And this is pretty much the case most of the time, except for one very crucial decision, probably the most important decision that you ever make, and that is just choosing exactly what game you're going to make. And actually, what happens during that decision, I'm going to show a very scientific illustration of that. So this is an indie game developer, and what happens is that your brain shrinks down a lot, and that sounds a lot worse than it is. Your brain shrinks down in order to make your heart, to allow for your heart to swell up and fill up your entire body, right? That's what happens scientifically, because it's almost 100% emotional choice, right? You don't choose what game you're going to make because you've done a lot of market research or analysis or stuff like that. It's because you've probably wanted to do it for a long time, maybe since you were a kid, and it's that one emotional choice that you assume, And here's an analogy. If your game were a kid, let's say your game is your kid, right? And he's about or she is about to go to college. Now, as a parent, if you're a responsible parent, you want that kid maybe to choose a career path that might help them do well in the long run, like be a lawyer or a doctor or something to that effect. And that's all good, but what if your kid is one of those artistic kids, right? That, they just want to do their art. And I don't have any kids, I don't know what that is like, but I was that kid. I was that very artistic kid when I was very young, and my parents noticed that and encouraged me, so I went to 8 years of art school. They let me do exactly what I wanted to. And when it came time to choose together as a family, what I was going to do for college, they were like, yeah, just keep making art because we know this is what you really want. And there was a very brief discussion there about what I would do for a living, because this was the 2000s in Romania, and just making games or anything digital really was just a very far off dream. And their attitude basically was, hey, look, if you are really passionate about this and you get good at it, then you're probably going to find a way to make a living off of it. And that's basically my attitude towards my game, because I could have been this guy. Maybe I overdid it on the wealth thing. So I could have been a lot richer, potentially, but equally miserable. So I'm very happy with that choice. Now maybe I lied just a little bit. This is getting a little bit meta here. Meta. I was up to this point. I was convinced that that choice was actually 100% emotional. But writing this presentation, what I did was start to look back retrospectively at my thought process, and I realized that actually my brain, behind my back, was somehow structuring my choices. And I'm just gonna show you. I'm gonna show you a diagram here, which might not make a lot of sense at the beginning, but bear with me, it will. So we now have a diagram. This is now an official presentation. I don't know if you know this kind of diagram. It's called, I think, the good, fast, cheap diagram. And this is a pretty good tool to analyze yourself or your skills or your project. Let's say that someone hires you to work for them. The concept behind this diagram is that we are all, imperfect, fallible human beings, and we wish that we could hit all these 3 points when we're working on something. We wish that we could be good and fast and cheap at the same time. But the reality is that probably you're only going to hit any combination of two out of these three. That's the concept. So if you choose two of them, one of them you just have to let go. So for example, if you're working with someone and they want something fast and good, the downside is that it's going to cost them. If they want something good and cheap, the downside is that it's going to probably take you, 10 freaking years to make that. And if they want something fast and cheap, it's probably going to suck, right? So that's the concept of this diagram. And I realized that what my brain was doing was just applying the concept behind this diagram in this way. So what it did was actually replace those attributes with questions that I was asking myself. And again, same concept. You could only answer yes to two of these three questions, right? Questions being, can I make it? Will I love working on it? And will it sell bajillions of copies, right? Again, same concept, just you have to answer truthfully. And of course, this is going to depend, the answers are going to depend a lot on your genre and on whether you are a well-known studio or it's your first game. If people know you, if people don't. My thought process was, my choices were, can I make it and will it sell bajillions? I'll probably be miserable because I don't want to spend years of my life working on something that I don't love, right? Um, if I had chosen, will I love working on it and will it sell bajillions? This is, I think, what a lot of indie teams do. They overshoot their mark, and maybe they don't have the skills or the budget or the team size to pull off what they want, and it's probably going to end up in tears of frustration. So what I chose was a combination of, I will love working on it, I can make it, and there's a big possibility that it's not going to sell bajillions of copies, and I'm okay with that. Uh, because my game is pretty niche, and I think it's okay to be niche. I think it's okay to be niche because, look, maybe you're working on your game. If your game is a niche one, you're probably scared witless about releasing it. And again, it's okay, so are we. But there are some advantages to being niche, and this might make you feel a little bit better about your choice. If you're niche, here are some pros. It's easier to attain interest. And we found this out when we kickstarted back in 2016. Nobody really knew who we were, but given the fact that we were making an adventure game and it's a very tight-knit community, a lot of people from the community, found out about us. Maybe not all of them supported us or cared about us or supported us financially via Kickstarter, but a lot of them found out who we are. So that was huge for us because we're just a small three-person team from the middle of Transylvania with no previous game-making experience. That was pretty good. Less competition is also huge. It was huge for us. It will be when we finally launch. Um, the fact that it's a tight-knit community means that we've met a lot of also players and developers of games, and we really don't see the other developers as competition, really. They're our friends, and what happens is that people talk about when they're going to be releasing and, just trying to help each other out, even if it's a competition. And every time an adventure game releases, it's like this little event, everyone's waiting for them, everyone buys it. It's great. Now, and of course you get some street cred doing something that not a lot of people do, which is, but also, obviously, there have to be some cons to this. There is some gatekeeping in the adventure game community. I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. That probably happens with a lot of other genres. What happens is that people love this thing that not a lot of people enjoy, and so they don't want those filthy casuals to get their grubby hands on their games. I think it's an okay attitude to have as long as you're a gamer. Not a good attitude to have if you're a developer. So that's something that we had to keep in mind. Then there's also the obsession with trueness. because adventure games are one of those weird genres that haven't really changed that much in the past 20 years. And I have to admit, I was a little bit, one of these very purist gamers. But ironically, working on a very classically inspired point and click, I just changed my views radically while working on it, and it's sort of reflected in the game in the sense that we tried to make it as as friendly to an audience that didn't really know about adventure games throughout. And also, maybe the weirdest thing, the obsession with the control scheme. And this might happen in other genres, but not like in point and click adventures. Because if you think about it, they're called point and click adventures. Like the control scheme is right there in the name. Not only is it in the name, it's right at the beginning of the name, which is weird. And I don't know what effect that has on people who've never played them. Because if you think about it, Doom is point and click, right? Because you just move your cursor on the demon and you click, and it's still point and click. Like StarCraft is point and click, but you don't call it a point and click RTS, right? So that got me thinking about how friendly you are when you're saying what game you're making, because you're saying you're a point and click. Um, Sometimes maybe if your game were a joke, sometimes I think that my game is a joke, but I'm just using an analogy. If your game were a joke, inside jokes are super fun, right? It's just you and your five friends, you know this joke and you're all laughing at it. But everyone around you is going to feel a little bit awkward and alienated, right? They're not going to get it. What you want is you don't just want five people to be laughing at your game. You want the entire universe to be pointing fingers and laughing at your game, right? Um, that analogy went a little bit south there, but that brings me to something called positioning. And here's a disclaimer, I don't know anything about marketing. I'm not sure that I like marketing, but I had to do it because I'm an indie game developer and I don't have the resources to have someone else do it. So what I think I understand marketing, positioning is, um, it's about how important it is to sell this perception of your game. And that is particularly important for games like ours because ours is a very narrative driven game, right? And it's not like other genres where you can give parts of your game to people to play and then you get feedback and it's all iterative and stuff. If you play our game, you're spoiled on it, you've experienced it all, and that's it. So positioning was pretty important. We realized that we're just selling this impression of our game, right? And there are strategies that can work for parts of the project. There are strategies that can work that don't work for other parts. For example, when we did our Kickstarter, we name dropped like there was no tomorrow. We name dropped LucasArts mainly because it was the main inspiration for us. And I think it really worked because nobody knew who we were, and we were just giving people a frame of reference. They didn't know who we were, but the moment that we told them, hey, we're inspired by LucasArts, I was like, okay, I know what those games are. I understand what these guys are doing. And it was absolutely shameless, and I'm still a little bit ashamed of it, but it worked. But throughout working on the game after this, we realized just how important it was to just maybe drop this, because you want your game to have your own identity. And there's also several other reasons, like when you say your name and LucasArts in the same sentence, people, even if you're not comparing yourself to them, people are going to draw comparisons, and you're not going to come out on top of that, And also, maybe associating yourself with a studio that went under, sadly, maybe not a good idea. There's also another thing that's very big with indie games, and that is the whole discussion between modern and retro / old-fashioned. And adventure games, man, they are weird because appealing to nostalgia is tricky because retro, what does retro even mean? People say 90s adventure games are old school, but if you look at genres like pixelated roguelites, they're actually older and they even look older than 90s adventure games, but people consider them modern and people consider 90s adventure games old school, and it's also a genre that was declared dead so many times and then revived. Adventure games are like the Beric Dondarrion of games, they just you kill them and they just keep coming back without an eye and they're like, oh, I'm still alive. So positioning, super important. I didn't want my game to be perceived as retro. I did initially, but I realized it wasn't healthy for them. And that's for several reasons. Here's a game called Firewatch. How many of you know or played Firewatch? Great game, right? So Theoretically, it has nothing to do with what I'm doing because my game is 2D. It's very cartoony. You just walk around. But what did you love about who loved Firewatch here? Who really loved Firewatch? What what was it about Firewatch that you loved most? There you go, the story and the characters, right? That's what really matters. And I realized this. This might seem like a very obvious thing to everyone. Maybe I'm slow, but I realized that was super important. Control scheme didn't matter. The fact that it was 2D or 3D didn't matter. What people cared about were the story and the characters. So maybe just try and make yourself as accessible as possible. Uh, I used to be in an alternative metal band when I was a little bit younger. And sadly, this is what happened a lot of the times, you know. There was no one in our audience. When we set out to start this band, we realized not only were we not gonna make any money of it, there probably wasn't an audience for us, and we were okay with that. The good news is that games are not like that. You can actually make a very niche game, and it can have a wide audience. You know, if you just convince your people to play your game, don't ask me how to do that. I'm trying to figure it out myself. You know, because you can take your average 20-year-old who's never listened to metal and try to convince them to become a Slayer fan in like a few days, but that's probably not going to happen. But they're going to play your niche game if you can convince them to, again, no idea how. So you can be niche and compromise. You can be niche and not compromise and still have mainstream success. And this brings me to putting forth universal values, which is the blandest slide title possible. I was ashamed when I wrote it. I apologize for it. But really, it is about putting forth what is universal about your game. So yeah, what is there about your game that is universally appealing? And in our case, you know, people love stories. This is if we listen to the beginning of a story, if we experience it, if we watch it, you need to listen to the end of it. This is hardwired, and that's how they get us to binge watch series and stuff. I did this thing. I experimented on my friend. I told him once, I met my friend and I was like, you will not believe what I saw above my apartment building this morning. And then I just left. I was like, look, I have to go. And he was running down the street trying to get me to tell him what it was that that I saw above my apartment building. I didn't answer. He was texting me, calling me. So people, if you start experiencing a story, that's a hugely powerful thing. So we're focusing on story and characters. The fact that it's 2D or 3D or mouse or controller controlled, it doesn't matter. We want you to care about the characters and not focus on the essentials. And I was pretty much convinced about this anyway, but I played this game this year. Who here has played this game? You guys played this game called Uncharted 4? Okay. So I really love this game. I always play AAA games late. I only played it this year. But once I beat it, I realized to my surprise, I was thinking back on it, I was like, what did I love most about this game? And you know, it had its problems. It was the set pieces were incredible, the production values were incredible, action was super nice. But what I loved most about this game were the characters and the story. And that was mind blowing to me because I realized I would have paid the same amount of money and I would have loved it the same amount had it looked like this, had it been an indie, you know, adventure game. So that's huge. That was pretty huge for me. So what can we do? I think what we can do is maybe make it friendlier than this. You know, you want people to perceive what your game is as easy as possible and don't get bogged down in definitions that are, you know, too complex or too crazy. And you know, it sounds like I'm giving advice from this like position of authority. You know, it sounds like I'm telling you guys what to do. I don't really know if what I'm saying here is valid, but I'm watching other developers that are doing this. There's a very successful, probably the most successful adventure game developer called Wajidai Games. And they're making these games that are very pixelated, and you might call them retro when you look at them, but they don't position them that way, you know? Everything about them, everyone talks about them as being modern adventure games, even though they don't look modern. So the way you perceive these games matters. And again, personally, I have no idea if what I talked to you guys about so far will actually work, but we can all make an experiment together. Uh, you can go to this URL. I think I've showed you this one before. This is not shameless self-plugging. We can all go to this URL and just follow my game. It's going to launch in early 2019. and see if I was right about it. And you kind of feel obligated to have a conclusion at the end of these talks. I think you need to dare to make the game you've always wanted, and not do it based on market research or trend chasing or anything like that. But you can take a lesson from the Uncharted thingy, and you need to try and flip that, I think. And the secret is to make the game exactly the way you want it to be, and then trick people into thinking that they're playing Uncharted. So that was my presentation. Thank you very much. Thanks.